The sun hung low over the jagged horizon of Arendor, casting long shadows across the barren plains. The air was thick with dust, stirred by the occasional gusts of wind that swept through the desolate landscape. At Fort Valor, one of humanity's last outposts on this alien frontier, life moved at a slow and cautious pace. Soldiers patrolled the perimeter in pairs, their boots crunching against the dry soil. Inside the walls, civilians went about their routines, trying to find some semblance of normalcy amidst the tension. Jake Miller stood atop the eastern watchtower, his sharp eyes scanning the distance. He was a tall man with broad shoulders, his face weathered by years of hardship. His dark hair had started to gray at the temples, and faint lines etched his forehead from countless sleepless nights. Jake had seen too much war in his lifetime, too many battles fought and lives lost, and yet here he was again, standing guard on another distant planet. This time, though, it wasn't just humans they were fighting. It was the barbarians, the beer. Barbarians of Arendor weren't like anything Jake had encountered before. They were fierce warriors, their bodies adorned with intricate tattoos and scars earned in combat. Their weapons were crude but effective, forged from the planet's natural resources. But what made them truly dangerous was their unpredictability. One day they would raid settlements without warning. The next they might sit quietly around a fire sharing stories and songs. Humanity had tried diplomacy, force, even isolation, but nothing seemed to work. Until now, a fragile truce had been brokered between humanity and the barbarian clan 6 months ago. Negotiations had dragged on for weeks, filled with heated arguments and near-violent confrontations. In the end, both sides agreed to a ceasefire, marking the first real attempt at peace since humanity arrived on Arendor. For Jake, the truce felt uneasy, like holding a live grenade with the pin halfway pulled. He didn't trust the barbarians, not completely, but orders were orders. And right now, those orders were to keep the peace. Claire Bennett approached the base of the watchtower, shielding her eyes from the setting sun as she looked up at Jake. She was a petite woman with curly brown hair tied back into a loose ponytail. Her green jacket bore the insignia of the diplomatic corps, signaling her role as a liaison between humanity and the barbarians. Claire had spent months learning their language and customs, determined to bridge the gap between two vastly different cultures. To Jake, she sometimes seemed naive, overly optimistic about the chances of lasting peace, but he respected her dedication, even if he didn't always agree with her methods. "Anything interesting?" Claire called up to him, her voice carrying over the wind. Jake glanced down at her, shaking his head. "Just the usual, dust, rocks, and more dust." She chuckled softly, climbing the ladder to join him on the platform. Once she reached the top, she leaned against the railing, gazing out at the endless expanse of land. "It's beautiful in its own way," she said after a moment. "Harsh, but beautiful." Jake raised an eyebrow. "I'll take your word for it," Claire smiled, used to his gruff demeanor. "You know, not everything has to be a battle, Jake. Sometimes you just have to let yourself appreciate the quiet moments." He gave her a sidelong glance. "Quiet moments don't last long around here." Her smile faltered slightly, and she turned her attention back to the horizon. "True enough, but we've managed 6 months without any major incidents. That's something, isn't it?" Jake didn't answer immediately. Instead, he shifted his weight, leaning forward slightly as he scanned the terrain once more. 6 months of peace sounded good on paper, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Over the past few weeks, there had been whispers of trouble brewing. Small raids on isolated settlements, livestock stolen, crops burned. None of it was enough to justify breaking the truce outright, but it was enough to make people nervous. "What do you think is really going on out there?" Claire asked, breaking the silence. Jake hesitated. "I don't know. Could be the barbarians testing us, seeing how far they can push before we snap." "And what if it's not them?" Claire pressed. "What if someone else is trying to sabotage the truce?" Jake frowned. "Who? We're all supposed to be on the same side." "Are we?" Claire countered. "Not everyone's happy about this arrangement. Some of our own people still think negotiating with the barbarians is a mistake." Jake sighed. running a hand through his hair. He knew she was right. There were factions within humanity who believed the only way to deal with the barbarians was through force. They saw the truce as a sign of weakness, a betrayal of human values. If someone wanted to stir up trouble, they wouldn't need to look far for allies. Before either of them could say anything more, a shout rang out from below. Both Jake and Claire turned toward the sound, spotting Private Ryan rushing toward the tower. His face was flushed and he waved a datapad frantically above his head. "Lieutenant Miller. Lieutenant Miller," Ryan called, stopping beneath the platform. "We've got a situation." Jake descended the ladder quickly, Claire close behind him. "What's going on?" he demanded once he reached the ground. Ryan handed over the data pad, his hands trembling slightly. "Reports came in from Settlement 7. They were attacked last night. No casualties, but most of their supplies are gone." Jake's jaw tightened as he scrolled through the report. Settlement 7 was one of the smaller outposts, located near the edge of the neutral zone established by the truce. It wasn't heavily fortified, making it an easy target. According to the survivors, the attackers had worn barbarian-style armor and wielded traditional weapons. But something about the description didn't sit right with Jake. "Did they see anyone clearly?" Claire asked, peering over Jake's shoulder. Ryan shook his head. "Most of them were asleep when it happened. By the time they woke up, the attackers were already gone." Jake handed the datapad back to Ryan. "Tell General Hayes I want a full investigation team sent to Settlement 7 immediately, and put the outpost on high alert. We may not be dealing with an isolated incident." "Yes, sir," Ryan replied, saluting before hurrying off. Claire crossed her arms, her expression troubled. "Do you think the barbarians are responsible?" "I don't know," Jake admitted, "but I'm not ruling it out." For the rest of the day, Fort Valor buzzed with activity as preparations were made to send reinforcements to Settlement 7. Jake coordinated with his team, ensuring everyone knew their roles. Meanwhile, Claire worked on drafting a message to Kale, the leader of the Iron Fangs, the largest and most influential barbarian clan. If the attacks were indeed linked to the barbarians, Kale needed to hear about them directly. As night fell, Jake found himself pacing outside the communications tent, waiting for Claire to finish her transmission. When she finally emerged, her face was pale and her hands trembled slightly. "Well?" Jake asked, stepping closer. Claire took a deep breath. "Kale denies any involvement. He says his people haven't ventured near Settlement 7 in weeks, but—" She hesitated, biting her lip. "But what?" Jake prompted. He mentioned rumors. Stories circulating among the other clans about strangers moving through their territory. Strangers wearing barbarian armor but speaking strangely. Jake's frown deepened. "Strangers? You mean humans?" Claire nodded slowly. "That's what it sounds like. Someone's impersonating the barbarians, Jake. Someone's trying to make it look like they broke the truce." Jake clenched his fists, anger simmering beneath the surface. Whoever was behind this attack wasn't just threatening the peace. They were playing both sides against each other. And if they succeeded, it wouldn't just be the barbarians who paid the price. Humanity would suffer too. "We need answers," Jake said firmly. "And we need them fast." Together, Jake and Claire walked back toward the command center, their minds racing with possibilities. The fragile truce that had held for 6 months was beginning to crack, and unless they acted quickly, it might collapse entirely. Somewhere, out there, hidden in the vast wilderness of Arendor, someone was pulling strings, and Jake was determined to find them before it was too late. The next morning brought a heavy sense of unease to Fort Valor. The sun rose over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, but the beauty of the dawn was lost on Jake Miller. He stood near the communications tent, sipping from a steaming cup of coffee as he reviewed the latest reports. Settlement 7 had been hit hard, and now rumors were spreading among the other outposts. People were scared, and fear had a way of making even the calmest situations spiral out of control. Claire Bennett joined him a few minutes later, her face pale and tired. She'd spent most of the night trying to reach Kale, the leader of the Iron Fangs and other barbarian clan leaders, to assure them that humanity wasn't planning retaliation. Her efforts had been met with mixed results. Some clans dismissed her outright, while others demanded proof that the attacks weren't staged by humans themselves. Any luck? Jake asked without looking up from the data pad in his hands. Claire shook her head. Not really. Kale listened, but I could tell he didn't fully believe me. He kept saying that if these strangers are impersonating his people, it's only a matter of time before someone blames the barbarians. Jake let out a frustrated sigh. That's exactly what whoever's behind this wants. They're setting us up for war. Claire nodded grimly. We need to find out who's doing this, and fast. If we don't, both sides will start pointing fingers, and then... She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Jake set his coffee cup down on a nearby crate. Let's focus on what we know so far. Someone attacked Settlement 7, dressed like barbarians. Kale denies involvement, and there are rumors about strangers in their territory. That means we're either dealing with rogue humans or someone trying to frame the barbarians. Or both, Claire added quietly. Jake glanced at her. Exactly. And until we figure out which one it is, we can't trust anyone, not even our own people. With that, they decided to broaden their investigation. The first step was interviewing survivors from Settlement 7. A transport shuttle arrived mid-morning, carrying several shaken settlers who had been relocated to Fort Valor for safety. Jake and Claire met them outside the infirmary, where medics were treating minor injuries and providing food and water. One of the settlers, a middle-aged man named Harold, stepped forward when Jake approached. His clothes were torn and dirty, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. Lieutenant Miller? He asked hesitantly. That's right, Jake replied, offering a reassuring nod. Can you tell me what happened? Harold swallowed hard, glancing nervously at the others before speaking. It was late at night, most of us were asleep. I woke up to shouting or loud noises. By the time I got outside, they were already inside the storage sheds. They took everything, food, tools, medicine. Some of them carried torches. I saw flames. Did you see their faces? Claire interjected gently. Harold shook his head. No. They wore helmets, covered their faces, but their armor, it looked like what the barbarians wear. Big shoulder plates, fur-lined cloaks. Jake exchanged a glance with Claire. So far, the description matched what they'd heard earlier. But something still felt off. What about their voices? Jake asked. Did you hear them talking? Harold frowned, thinking back. Yeah, I did. It was strange. They sounded human, but not quite. Like they were trying to mimic the barbarian's accent or something. Claire jotted down notes on her data pad, her expression thoughtful. Thank you, Harold. You've been very helpful. As the interviews continued, similar accounts emerged. The attackers had moved quickly and efficiently, targeting supplies rather than people. No one had seen their faces clearly, but everyone agreed. Their voices didn't sound quite right. By late afternoon, Jake and Claire gathered in the command center to discuss their findings. General Hayes, a stern woman with sharp features and an even sharper gaze, presided over the meeting. Maps of the surrounding area were spread across the table, marked with pins indicating recent incidents. All right, Hayes said, folding her arms. What do we know? Jake stepped forward, pointing to the map. Settlement 7 was hit 2 nights ago. Before that, there were smaller raids on 3 other outposts, all within the neutral zone. In every case, the attackers wore barbarian-style armor and spoke in broken accents. Survivors say they sounded human, but not natural. Hayes raised an eyebrow. You think this is an inside job? It's possible, Jake admitted. Whoever's behind this knows the terrain well enough to hit remote settlements without being detected. And they're using tactics designed to turn humans against the barbarians, Claire chimed in. There's also the possibility that someone's smuggling weapons and gear to rogue groups. If we can trace the source of those supplies, we might be able to identify the culprits. Hayes tapped her fingers on the table, considering their words. Fine. Start digging into supply chains. Check manifests, inventory logs, anything that might point to foul play. And keep pushing Kale for answers. If he's hiding something, I want to know. After the meeting, Jake and Claire headed to the quartermaster's office to review supply records. Nathan Cole, the base's supply officer, greeted them with a forced smile. He was a wiry man in his early 30s with thinning hair and nervous energy that made him seem constantly on edge. "Lieutenant Miller, Miss Bennett," Nathan said, gesturing for them to sit. "How can I help you?" "We're looking into recent shipments," Jake explained. "Specifically anything unusual, missing items, unauthorized transfers, that sort of thing." Nathan frowned, pulling up a holographic display of inventory. "Nothing jumps out at me, but I can run a detailed search. Give me a moment." As Nathan worked, Claire noticed his hands trembling slightly. She exchanged a glance with Jake, who gave a subtle nod. Something about Nathan's behavior didn't sit right. A few minutes later, Nathan turned back to them. "Everything checks out. No discrepancies in the logs." "Are you sure?" Jake pressed. "Because if there's anything you're not telling us—" "I'm telling you the truth," Nathan snapped, his voice rising. Then, realizing how defensive he sounded, he forced a laugh. "Sorry, it's just stressful times, you know. Everyone's on edge." Jake studied him for a moment longer before nodding. "All right, thanks for your time." Once they were outside, Claire voiced her suspicions. "He's hiding something." "Agreed," Jake said, "but we'll need more than gut feelings to prove it." Over the next few days, Jake and Claire dug deeper into Nathan's activities. They reviewed surveillance footage from the supply depot, cross-referenced his personal communications, and interviewed other staff members. What they found was troubling. Encrypted messages sent from Nathan's terminal to unknown recipients, large sums of unaccounted-for credits transferred from his account, and frequent trips to the outer perimeter under the guise of routine inspections. Convinced they had enough evidence to confront him, Jake arranged a private meeting with Nathan in the quartermaster's office. When they arrived, Nathan was sitting at his desk, visibly sweating despite the cool temperature. "We need to talk," Jake said, closing the door behind them. Nathan's eyes darted between Jake and Claire, panic evident in his expression. "About what?" "About these messages," Jake replied, sliding a datapad across the desk. On it were copies of the encrypted files they'd uncovered. "Care to explain?" Nathan's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about." Claire leaned forward. "Don't lie to us, Nathan. We know you've been communicating with someone outside the base. Who are they? What are you hiding?" For a moment, Nathan looked like he might break down. Then, steeling himself, he stood up abruptly. "I'm not saying another word. You want answers? Go ahead and arrest me. See if it gets you anywhere." Before Jake could respond, alarms blared throughout the base. Red lights flashed as automated warnings echoed through the corridors. "Perimeter breach detected. All personnel report to stations immediately." Jake cursed under his breath. "Stay here," he told Claire, drawing his sidearm. "I'll handle this." But as he rushed toward the exit, he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was happening outside was connected to Nathan, and that they were running out of time to stop it. The alarms blared louder as Jake sprinted toward the perimeter wall, his boots pounding against the hard-packed dirt. Soldiers scrambled into position, their faces tense with urgency. The breach had been detected near the southern gate, one of the most vulnerable points of Fort Valor's defenses. As Jake reached the scene, he saw a group of figures retreating into the wilderness beyond the wall. They moved quickly, disappearing into the shadows of the jagged cliffs that surrounded the outpost. "What do we have?" Jake barked at Sergeant Lewis, who was coordinating the response. "Unknown hostiles, sir," Lewis replied, his voice clipped. "They scaled the wall and disabled 2 of our surveillance drones before we could respond. No casualties on our side, but they left something behind." Jake followed Lewis to the spot where the intruders had been spotted. There, lying in the dirt, was a small metallic device partially buried under loose soil. It looked like a transmitter of some kind, its blinking lights casting faint reflections on the ground. Jake crouched down to examine it more closely, his fingers brushing against the cold metal. "Get this to tech support," he ordered, handing the device to a nearby soldier. "I want to know what it does and where it came from." As the soldier hurried off, Jake turned his attention back to the horizon. Whoever these intruders were, they weren't barbarians. Their tactics were too precise, too calculated. And now, they'd left behind a piece of equipment deliberately, almost as if they wanted it found. Claire arrived moments later, her breath coming in short gasps from running across the base. "What happened?" she asked, looking around at the chaos. "Intruders," Jake replied tersely. "They got in, messed with our systems, and left without taking anything. Except maybe Nathan." Claire frowned. "Nathan? What do you mean?" "He's gone," Jake said. "When I left him in the quartermaster's office, he must have slipped out during the confusion. Surveillance footage shows him heading toward the southern gate just before the breach." Claire's eyes widened. "You think he was working with them?" "It's starting to look that way," Jake admitted grimly. "But until we find him, we won't know for sure." The search party assembled quickly, consisting of a dozen soldiers armed with rifles and tracking gear. Jake led the team himself, determined to catch up with Nathan before he could vanish completely. The trail led south away from Fort Valor and deeper into the untamed wilderness of Arendor. The terrain grew rougher the farther they went, with rocky hills and dense thickets slowing their progress. After several hours of pursuit, the team stumbled upon a clearing where signs of recent activity were evident. Scuffed footprints marked the ground, and discarded ration wrappers suggested someone, or multiple people, had stopped here briefly. Jake knelt to inspect the area, his sharp eyes catching something glinting in the sunlight. He picked it up carefully, a torn scrap of fabric stained with blood. "This is fresh," he muttered, holding it up for the others to see. Whoever was here didn't get far. Claire, who had insisted on joining the search despite Jake's protests, stepped forward cautiously. "Do you think Nathan's hurt?" "Or worse," Jake replied darkly. "We need to keep moving." The trail eventually led them to the edge of a dense forest, its twisted trees forming an impenetrable canopy overhead. The air inside was cooler, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Jake signaled for silence as they entered, every sense on high alert. Somewhere ahead they could hear faint rustling sounds, though whether it was caused by animals or humans remained unclear. It wasn't long before they encountered their first clue. Hidden among the roots of a massive tree was a makeshift campsite, complete with abandoned supplies and crude weapons. Jake examined the items closely, noting the mix of human-made tools and barbarian-style blades. Whoever had set up this camp was blending elements from both cultures, a dangerous combination. "Look at this," Claire whispered, pointing to a pile of documents scattered near the fire pit. She picked one up, scanning its contents. "These are supply manifests from Fort Valor." Jake's jaw tightened. So Nathan wasn't acting alone. Someone else has been feeding information to whoever's behind all this. Before they could investigate further, a soft voice called out from the shadows, "Don't move." Everyone froze, hands instinctively reaching for their weapons. From behind a thick trunk emerged a young woman clad in tattered clothing, her face streaked with dirt. Her hair was matted, and her eyes darted nervously between the soldiers, but she held a knife steady in one hand. "Who are you?" Jake demanded, lowering his rifle slightly to show he meant no immediate harm. "My name is Mara," the woman replied warily, "and if you're looking for your missing man, you're too late." "What do you mean?" Claire asked gently, stepping forward. "Do you know where he is?" Mara hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting someone, or something, to appear. Finally, she nodded. "He came through here yesterday, said he was being chased, but the ones after him, they caught up." Jake exchanged a glance with Claire. "Who caught up with him?" Mara swallowed hard. "Mercenaries. They've been operating in this region for months, trading weapons and supplies to anyone willing to pay. Your man made a deal with them, but when things went sour, they turned on him." "Why should we believe you?" Jake pressed, his tone skeptical. "Because I'm running from them too," Mara shot back, her voice rising slightly. "They killed my family, burned my village. If you don't trust me, fine, but you'll never find your answers without my help." Claire placed a calming hand on Jake's arm. "Let's hear her out." Reluctantly, Jake lowered his weapon, fully. "All right, tell us everything you know." Over the next hour, Mara explained how she had become entangled with the mercenaries. She claimed to be a former member of the Iron Fangs, exiled by Kale after questioning his leadership. Alone and desperate, she had stumbled upon their operation while scavenging for food. What she discovered shocked her. Crates of advanced weaponry smuggled onto Arendor, far beyond what the barbarians typically used. Some of the equipment bore markings from human corporations, suggesting collusion between rogue factions on both sides. "They're using us," Mara said bitterly, "turning us against each other so they can profit from the chaos." Jake's expression darkened. "If what you're saying is true, then this goes deeper than we thought." Mara nodded. "There's a facility not far from here, an old mining outpost. That's where they store the weapons. If you want proof, that's where you'll find it." Without hesitation, Jake decided to follow her lead. The group set off once more, guided by Mara's intimate knowledge of the land. She navigated them through narrow ravines and hidden paths, avoiding patrols of mercenaries who roamed the area. As they traveled, Jake couldn't help but notice the scars on Mara's arms and neck, marks of a life lived in constant danger. By nightfall, they reached the outskirts of the mining facility. It loomed ahead of them, a hulking structure carved into the side of a mountain. Faint lights flickered in the windows, and the hum of machinery echoed in the distance. Security cameras scanned the perimeter, but Mara knew exactly where the blind spots were. "This way," she whispered, leading them to a concealed entrance at the rear of the building. "Be careful. There are guards inside." Jake motioned for his team to spread out, keeping their movements silent as they slipped through the door. Inside, the facility was a maze of corridors and storage rooms, each filled with crates stamped with unfamiliar logos. Claire opened one cautiously, revealing rows of plasma rifles and grenades, weapons far superior to anything the barbarians possessed. "This is it," she murmured, her voice trembling with anger. "This is how they've been arming both sides." Jake clenched his fists, his mind racing with possibilities. Whoever was orchestrating this operation wasn't just trying to start a war, they were profiting from it. But proving it would require more than just evidence. It would take timing, strategy, and a lot of luck. Suddenly, a shout rang out from down the hall. One of the guards had spotted them. Gunfire erupted, echoing through the narrow passages as Jake and his team returned fire. Mara ducked behind a stack of crates, her knife useless against the mercenaries' superior firepower. "We need to fall." "Back," Jake yelled, grabbing Claire's arm and pulling her toward safety. "No," Mara shouted, pointing to a nearby staircase. "Up there. There's a control room. We can shut down the entire facility from there." Jake hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Go. We'll cover you." With bullets ricocheting off the walls around them, the group fought their way upstairs, narrowly avoiding capture. When they finally reached the control room, Claire immediately began hacking into the system, while Jake and the others held off the advancing mercenaries. "You've got 2 minutes," Jake warned, reloading his rifle. "I'm almost there," Claire replied, her fingers flying across the keyboard. With a final keystroke, the lights flickered and died, plunging the facility into darkness. Outside, explosions rocked the building as automated fail-safes triggered the destruction of sensitive equipment. Jake grabbed Claire's hand, signaling for everyone to retreat. They burst out into the cool night air just as the facility collapsed behind them, sending plumes of smoke billowing into the sky. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mara broke the silence. "You did it. You destroyed their operation." The journey back to Fort Valor was long and exhausting. The group moved quickly, knowing that time was not on their side. Every step they took felt heavier than the last, weighed down by fatigue and the gravity of what they had uncovered. Jake led the way, his rifle slung over his shoulder while Claire walked beside him, clutching a datapad filled with evidence from the destroyed mining facility. Mara trailed behind, her sharp eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of pursuit. By the time they reached the outskirts of Fort Valor, the sun was setting once again, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and red. The sight of the outpost walls brought a sense of relief, but it was short-lived. Jake knew that uncovering the truth was only half the battle. Convincing others to act on it would be just as difficult, if not more so. As they approached the main gate, Soldiers stationed there immediately recognized Jake and waved them through. Word of their return spread quickly, and within minutes General Hayes appeared in the command center, her expression unreadable. "What happened out there?" she demanded, her voice sharp. Jake wasted no time. "We found the source of the weapons, being smuggled onto Arendor. It's part of a larger operation. Someone's been arming both sides to escalate the conflict." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "And you have proof?" Claire stepped forward, holding up the datapad. "Yes, ma'am. We retrieved files from the facility before we destroyed it. They show shipments of advanced weaponry linked to a corporation called Nexus Dynamics." The name sent a ripple through the room. Nexus Dynamics was a powerful company known for its ruthless business practices and deep pockets. If they were involved, this went far beyond simple sabotage. It was corporate greed at its worst. Hayes took the datapad, scrolling through the information silently. Her face remained impassive, but Jake could see the tension in her jaw. Finally, she looked up. "This is troubling, but we can't act without solid evidence tying Nexus directly to these operations." "We'll get it," Jake said firmly, "but we need your support to move forward." Hayes hesitated, then nodded. "Very well, but tread carefully, Lieutenant. If Nexus is involved, they'll have friends in high places. One wrong move and this whole thing could blow up in our faces." With the General's reluctant approval, Jake and Claire set to work analyzing the data further. They spent hours, poring over documents, cross-referencing names and transactions until one name stood out: Daniel Cross. A mid-level executive at Nexus Dynamics, Cross had overseen multiple projects related to resource extraction on Arendor. His signature appeared on several key documents authorizing the shipment of weapons to remote locations. "Daniel Cross," Claire murmured, staring at the screen. "He's the link we've been looking for." Jake leaned over her shoulder, studying the profile. "If we can find him, we can expose the whole operation." Their next challenge was figuring out where to start looking. After consulting with intelligence officers, they learned that Cross had recently arrived on Arendor under the guise of inspecting mining operations. However, his itinerary included several unscheduled stops near the neutral zone, the same areas where the attacks had occurred. "We need to track him down," Jake said. "But if he's as dangerous as he seems, we'll need backup." Mara, who had been listening quietly from the corner of the room, spoke up. "I know someone who might help, a trader named Elias. He travels between human settlements and Barbarian camps. If anyone knows where Cross is hiding, it's him." Despite initial reservations about trusting a stranger, Jake agreed to meet with Elias. The following morning, they set out for a nearby trading post where Mara claimed Elias often conducted business. True to her word, they found him seated at a makeshift table surrounded by crates of goods and curious locals haggling over prices. Elias was an older man with a scruffy beard and weathered features. His piercing blue eyes scanned the group as they approached, lingering briefly on Mara before settling on Jake. "You must be the ones Mara told me about," Elias said, his voice gravelly but calm. "What do you want?" "We're looking for Daniel Cross," Jake replied without preamble. "Do you know where he is?" Elias chuckled dryly. "Cross isn't exactly the kind of man who advertises his whereabouts, but I've heard whispers. He's holed up in an old research station east of here, place called Delta Ridge." Jake exchanged a glance with Claire. Delta Ridge was remote, even by Arendor standards. If Cross was hiding there, it meant he didn't want to be found. "Thanks," Jake said, nodding at Elias. "We owe you one." Elias shrugged. "Just make sure whatever you're doing doesn't come back to bite us all in the end." With directions in hand, the group prepared to leave immediately. The journey to Delta Ridge would take 2 days on foot, navigating treacherous terrain and avoiding patrols. As they packed supplies, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. "Are you sure about this?" she asked Jake as they loaded gear into a transport vehicle. "If Cross is as dangerous as we think, he won't go down without a fight." "I'm sure," Jake replied, his tone resolute. "We've come too far to turn back now." The trip to Delta Ridge proved grueling. The landscape grew increasingly hostile, with jagged cliffs and narrow ravines making travel slow and hazardous. At night, they huddled around small fires, keeping watch in shifts to avoid ambushes. Despite the challenges, morale remained high. Each step brought them closer to exposing the truth, and hopefully ending the cycle of violence plaguing Arendor. On the second day, they finally reached Delta Ridge. The research station loomed ahead, a decrepit structure perched precariously on the edge of a steep cliff. Windows were shattered and vines crept along the walls, giving it an abandoned appearance. But subtle signs, a fresh tire track, faint smoke rising from a chimney, hinted otherwise. Jake signaled for the group to split up, approaching the building from different angles to cover all entrances. He and Claire took the front door, moving cautiously as they pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the floor creaked underfoot. Empty offices and labs lined the hallway, their contents stripped bare. They found Cross in the largest room at the center of the station. He sat at a desk littered with papers and holographic displays, his suit immaculate despite the dilapidated surroundings. When he saw them, a smug smile spread across his face. "Took you long enough," Cross said, leaning back in his chair. "I was beginning to think you'd given up." Jake raised his rifle, aiming it squarely at Cross. "It's over, we know what you've been doing." Cross laughed, unperturbed. "Do you really? Destroying my operation won't change anything. People like me will always exist. Peace is weakness. Chaos drives progress." Claire stepped forward, her voice steady. "Not this time. You've manipulated both sides, turned them against each other for profit. That ends now." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then, with a flick of his wrist, Cross activated a hidden mechanism beneath the desk. Alarms blared, and the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the halls. "I wouldn't count on leaving alive," Cross sneered, standing up slowly. "My men are already on their way." Jake tightened his grip on the rifle. "Then let's finish this." The ensuing fight was chaotic and brutal. Cross's mercenaries poured into the room armed to the teeth. Bullets ricocheted off walls, and the air filled with shouts and the stench of gunpowder. Claire ducked behind a toppled table, returning fire while Jake charged forward, determined to reach Cross. Mara joined the fray, wielding a stolen pistol with surprising skill. Together they fought their way through the chaos, inching closer to their target. Finally, Jake tackled Cross to the ground, pinning him down with sheer force. "It's over," Jake growled, pressing the barrel of his rifle against Cross's temple. "You're done." Cross glared at him, hatred burning in his eyes. "You may have stopped me, but you haven't fixed anything. This planet is broken, and nothing you do will change that." Jake didn't respond. Instead, he secured Cross's hands with zip ties and dragged him to his feet. The mercenaries, realizing their leader was captured, began retreating, disappearing into the wilderness as quickly as they had arrived. When the dust settled, the group regrouped outside, battered but victorious. Cross was handed over to General Hayes, who promised to ensure he faced justice. For the first time in months, there was hope that peace might truly be possible. As they watched the sun rise over Delta Ridge, Claire turned to Jake. "Do you think this is the end?" The aftermath of the battle at Delta Ridge left everyone shaken, but determined. Jake, Claire, and Mara returned to Fort Valor with Daniel Cross in custody, his smug demeanor replaced by a cold silence. The evidence they had gathered from the WO research station was overwhelming. Documents, recordings, and encrypted files that tied Nexus dynamics directly to the smuggling operation. It was enough to expose the conspiracy and hold Cross accountable for his crimes. General Hayes wasted no time. Within hours of their return, she convened an emergency meeting with her senior officers and representatives from both human settlements and barbarian clans. The atmosphere in the command center was tense, with mistrust lingering in the air. Kyle, the leader of the Iron Fangs, arrived flanked by several of his warriors, their expressions unreadable. Despite the truce, old wounds ran deep, and neither side trusted the other completely. Claire stood at the front of the room, clutching the datapad containing the damning evidence. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady as she began to speak. "What we've uncovered proves that this conflict wasn't started by either humans or barbarians. It was orchestrated by someone who wanted war, for profit." She pressed a button on the datapad, projecting holographic images of the documents onto the wall. Names, dates, and transactions scrolled across the display, each one pointing back to Nexus Dynamics and Daniel Cross. Murmurs rippled through the room as people absorbed the information. "This man," Claire continued, gesturing toward Cross, who sat silently under guard, "has been arming both sides, fueling the violence to destabilize Arendor. His goal was simple: create chaos so Nexus could seize control of the planet's resources." Kale stepped forward, his piercing gaze fixed on Cross. "You dare manipulate my people?" he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "This is betrayal." Cross smirked, unrepentant even now. "Betrayal? No. Progress. You were pawns in a game you couldn't hope to understand. Your war served a purpose, one that benefits humanity far more than your primitive ways ever could." Jake clenched his fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. He wanted nothing more than to shut Cross up, but he knew Claire was right. They needed to focus on rebuilding trust, not revenge. "Enough," General Hayes barked, cutting off any further argument. "Cross will be tried for his crimes, and Nexus Dynamics will answer for its role in this. But first, we need to decide what happens next. Can we move forward together, or are we doomed to repeat the past?" The question hung heavy in the air. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Kale turned, to face the assembled humans, his expression thoughtful. "My people have suffered because of lies and greed. If you truly seek peace, prove it. Work with us, not against us." Claire nodded earnestly. "We want the same thing, a chance to start over, to build something better." Reluctantly, Kale extended a hand toward General Hayes. After a brief hesitation, she shook it firmly, sealing the agreement. The room erupted into quiet murmurs of approval, though skepticism still lingered in many eyes. Over the following days, efforts to restore stability intensified. Teams of engineers and laborers worked alongside Barbarian craftsmen to repair damage caused by the recent attacks. Settlement 7, which had been hit hardest, became a symbol of cooperation as humans and barbarians joined forces to rebuild homes and replenish supplies. Jake and Claire oversaw much of the operation, their presence helping to ease tensions between the two groups. Mara played a crucial role as well, acting as a mediator between the clans and the settlers. Her knowledge of both cultures made her invaluable, and slowly she began to earn respect from those who once doubted her loyalty. Even Kyle seemed willing to listen when she spoke, though his trust remained cautious. Despite these strides, challenges persisted. Not everyone supported the renewed push for peace. Some humans viewed the barbarians as irredeemable savages, while certain barbarian factions saw humanity as weak and corrupt. Fringe groups on both sides continued to resist reconciliation, launching sporadic raids aimed at undermining the fragile alliance. One such attack occurred late one night, targeting a supply convoy en route to Settlement 7. Jake and his team responded immediately, arriving just in time to drive off the attackers. Among the debris left behind was a banner bearing the insignia of a rogue barbarian clan known as the Shadow Talons. Their leader, a ruthless warrior named Rask, had long opposed Kale's leadership and rejected the truce outright. "We can't let them keep doing this," Jake said as he examined the scene. "Every attack like this chips away at the progress we've made," Claire agreed. "If we don't address this soon, it'll spiral out of control. We need to confront Rask directly." Kyle, however, was hesitant. When Jake and Claire brought the matter to him, he frowned deeply. "Rask is dangerous. He commands loyalty from many who share his hatred of outsiders. If we strike against him openly, it may only provoke more violence." "Then what do you suggest?" Jake asked, frustration creeping into his tone. "We can't just sit back and do nothing." Kyle considered the question carefully. Finally, he nodded. "There may be another way. Mara knows the land better than anyone. She can guide you to Rask's stronghold. But tread lightly. If you're discovered, there will be bloodshed." With Kale's reluctant blessing, Jake, Claire, and Mara set out once again, this time heading north toward the Shadow Talon's territory. The journey was fraught with danger, as the region was riddled with traps and ambush points designed to deter intruders. Mara led them through hidden paths, her instincts proving invaluable as they navigated the treacherous landscape. After 3 days of travel, they reached the outskirts of Rask's camp. Nestled in a valley surrounded by steep cliffs, the stronghold was heavily fortified, with guards patrolling the perimeter day and night. Smoke rose from numerous fires and the sound of drums echoed in the distance, a grim reminder of the hostility awaiting them. "We need a plan," Jake whispered, observing the camp from their vantage point. "We can't just walk in there." Mara pointed to a narrow ridge overlooking the valley. "There's a cave system nearby. It leads directly into the heart of the camp. If we use it, we might be able to surprise them." Claire hesitated. "That's risky. What if we get trapped inside?" "It's our best shot," Jake replied firmly. "Let's move." Under the cover of darkness, they slipped into the cave system, navigating tight passages and uneven terrain. The air grew colder the deeper they went, and the sound of dripping water echoed eerily around them. Finally, they emerged into a small cavern that opened directly into the camp. From their hiding spot, they watched as Rask addressed his followers, his voice booming with authority. "The truce is a lie," he shouted, pacing back and forth. "Kyle has betrayed us all, bowing to the humans instead of standing strong. But we will not follow his cowardice. We will take what is ours by force." His words ignited cheers from the crowd, their fervor palpable. Jake exchanged a glance with Claire. Convincing Rask to stand down peacefully seemed impossible. "We'll have to capture him," Jake murmured. "Without him, the Shadow Talons won't have a leader to rally behind." The plan was risky, but they had no other choice. Under the cover of darkness, they moved stealthily through the camp, taking out guards one by one until they reached Rask's tent. Inside, he sat alone, sharpening a blade by firelight. Before he could react, Jake tackled him to the ground, pinning him down with surprising speed. "Enough," Jake growled, pressing a knife to Rask's throat. "Your war ends here," Rask snarled, struggling against Jake's grip. "You think capturing me changes anything? My people will fight, until every last human is gone." "No," Claire said firmly, stepping into view. "They won't, because Kale has already disavowed you. Without his support, your rebellion is meaningless." For the first time, uncertainty flickered in Rask's eyes. Realizing resistance was futile, he stopped struggling, allowing himself to be bound and led away. With their leader captured, the Shadow Talons quickly surrendered, unwilling to risk further bloodshed. Back at Fort Valor, news of Rask's capture spread quickly, bolstering confidence in the truce. Though tensions remained, the threat of open rebellion had been neutralized for now. As Jake and Claire stood outside the command center, watching the sun rise over the horizon, a sense of cautious optimism settled over them. "It's not perfect," Claire admitted softly, "but it's a start." Jake nodded, his gaze fixed on the distant hills. "Yeah, and as long as we keep fighting for it, maybe it'll stay that way." The days that followed Rask's capture brought a fragile calm to Arendor. Fort Valor buzzed with activity as humans and barbarians worked side by side to rebuild what had been broken. Settlement 7, once a symbol of fear and loss, now stood as a testament to cooperation. New homes were constructed, crops replanted, and defenses reinforced. For the first time in months, there was hope, not just for survival, but for something better. Jake and Claire spent most of their time coordinating efforts between the two groups. It wasn't easy. Old prejudices died hard, and mistrust lingered beneath the surface. But small victories began to add up. A shared meal here, a joint patrol there. Each act of collaboration chipped away at the walls separating them. Even Kale, who had initially been skeptical, seemed more willing to engage with humanity, his warriors often joining human soldiers on missions to secure the neutral zone. Mara played an increasingly vital role in bridging the gap. Her ability To navigate both worlds made her a natural mediator, and she became a trusted figure among both humans and barbarians. Though she still carried scars from her past, she found purpose in helping others heal. Jake noticed the change in her demeanor. Her guarded expression softened, replaced by moments of quiet confidence. Despite these strides, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that the peace they had fought so hard for remained precarious. Nexus. Dynamics' influence ran deep, and while Daniel Cross was in custody, the company itself was unlikely to admit wrongdoing without a fight. Rumors circulated about corporate envoys arriving on Arendor to negotiate terms, though everyone knew it was just a ploy to regain control. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jake sat alone on the eastern watchtower, staring out at the endless plains. The wind carried the faint sounds of laughter from the settlement below, a rare sound these days. He felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see Claire standing beside him, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you could use this," she said, handing him one. Jake accepted it with a grateful nod. "Thanks." They sat in silence for a while, sipping their drinks and watching the stars appear one by one. Finally, Claire spoke. "You've been quiet lately. What's on your mind?" Jake sighed, leaning back against the railing. "I keep thinking about how close we came to losing everything. One wrong move and this whole thing could have fallen apart. We stopped Cross, we dealt with Rask, but it doesn't feel like enough." Claire nodded thoughtfully. "It's not enough, not yet, but it's a start. And sometimes that's all you can ask for." Jake glanced at her. "Do you really believe that? That we can make this work?" "I do," Claire replied firmly. "Not because I'm naive, but because I've seen what happens when people come together. Look at Settlement 7. Look at Mara. They're proof that change is possible." Her words struck a chord with Jake. He had spent so much of his life expecting the worst, preparing for failure. But maybe, just maybe, there was another way. The arrival of Nexus Dynamics representatives confirmed Jake's fears. Dressed in sleek suits and armed with polished speeches, they descended upon Fort Valor like vultures circling prey. Their leader, a woman named Evelyn Drake, wasted no time asserting her authority. "We understand your concerns," Drake said, during a tense meeting with General Hayes and Kale. "But let's be clear, Nexus Dynamics has invested heavily in Arendor. Any disruption to our operations will have serious consequences, for everyone." Her tone was calm, almost pleasant, but the threat behind her words was unmistakable. Jake clenched his fists, biting back a sharp retort. Beside him, Claire leaned forward. "Your operations nearly destroyed this planet," she said evenly. "If you think we'll stand by while you exploit its resources again, you're mistaken." Drake smiled thinly. "Exploitation is such a harsh word. We prefer to call it progress. Surely you can appreciate the benefits technology brings." Kale stepped forward, his towering frame casting a shadow over the room. "Progress built on lies is no progress at all. Leave this place or face the consequences." For a moment, Drake's composure faltered. Then she straightened, her smile unwavering. "Very well. But know this. Nexus does not give up easily. If you choose to oppose us, you'll regret it." With that, she turned on her heel and left, her entourage trailing behind her. The tension in the room lingered long after they were gone. In the days that followed, preparations for potential conflict intensified. Nexus wasn't going to back down quietly, and everyone knew it. Fort Valor doubled its patrols, and Kale sent additional warriors to reinforce the neutral zone. Supplies were stockpiled, and evacuation plans were drawn up in case the worst happened. Amidst the chaos, Jake and Claire continued their work, determined to hold the line. They reached out to other settlements, urging them to unite against Nexus. Slowly but surely, alliances formed, not just between humans and barbarians, but among smaller factions who had previously stayed neutral. Mara took charge of organizing, scouts using her knowledge of the land to track Nexus's movements. "They're gathering forces near the southern ridge," she reported one evening. "Looks like they're planning something big." Jake frowned. "How soon?" "A few days, maybe less. They're moving fast." General Hayes called an emergency meeting to discuss strategy. We can't let them gain a foothold, she said. If we strike first, we might be able to disrupt their plans. Kyle agreed. My warriors are ready. Tell us where to hit and we'll make sure they don't. Recover. The decision was made. A coordinated assault on Nexus's position before they could launch their own attack. It was risky, but waiting would only give them an advantage. Jake volunteered to lead the mission, knowing full well the stakes involved. The night of the operation, the air was thick with anticipation. Soldiers and warriors alike gathered outside Fort Valor, their faces painted with determination. Jake addressed them briefly, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. This isn't just about defending ourselves, he said. It's about proving that we can stand together, human and barbarian, as equals. Tonight we fight for Arendor, for peace. Cheers erupted, echoing across the plains. With Mara guiding them through hidden paths, the group moved swiftly and silently toward the southern ridge. When they reached Nexus's encampment, they found it bustling with activity. Vehicles being loaded, weapons distributed, and orders shouted into the night. Jake signaled for the attack to begin. Arrows rained down from above as barbarian archers unleashed volleys, followed by a coordinated charge from human soldiers. Chaos erupted as Nexus's forces scrambled to respond, caught off guard by the sudden assault. Jake led a team directly into the heart of the camp, targeting key supply, depots and communication hubs. Explosions lit up the sky as crates of ammunition ignited, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. Claire stayed close, providing cover fire and shouting updates to the others. Despite their initial surprise, Nexus fought back fiercely. Reinforcements poured in from nearby outposts, turning the tide of the battle. Jake found himself face to face with Evelyn Drake, her once pristine suit now streaked with dirt and ash. You should have stayed out of this, Drake snarled, raising a pistol. Jake dodged just in time, returning fire and forcing her to retreat. In the ensuing struggle, he managed to disarm her, pinning her to the ground. It's over, he growled. Nexus is finished here. Drake spat at him, her eyes blazing with fury. You think this changes anything? There will always be others. Like us, you can't stop progress. Jake tightened his grip. Maybe not, but we can try. By dawn, the battle was won. Nexus's forces had been driven back, their equipment destroyed, and morale shattered. Though casualties were high, the victory was decisive. As the survivors regrouped at Fort Valor, a sense of triumph and relief spread throughout the ranks. Cale approached Jake and Claire, his expression solemn yet grateful. You have earned my trust, he said simply, and the trust of my people. Together, we will rebuild. Claire smiled, exhaustion evident in her eyes. Thank you. That means more than you know. Jake looked around at the faces of those who had fought alongside him, human and barbarian alike. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope. As the sun rose higher, bathing the landscape in golden light, Jake turned to Claire. You were right. Peace isn't perfect, but it's worth fighting for. She nodded, her smile widening, and we'll keep fighting for as long as it takes.